what happened was that with the collapse of these harsh Darwinian selection conditions, because of the Industrial Revolution, child mortality falls from about 50% in 1800, meaning that every generation, all of these interrelated, because anything that is adaptive is related to anything else which is adaptive at the genetic level. We know this now. Low intelligence is genetically associated with heart disease, strokes, cancer, whatever. So these things are all interrelated, and the selection pressure against the maladaptive stuff collapsed from 50% child mortality to 1% child mortality. So you get a build-up of mutation, and that is in the direction of deviance from what we were selected for.
Ed, how are you?
Hello. Yes, I'm okay. It's very hot in England where I come from, so I'm very. It's about 104 degrees in American language. So I'm very glad to discover that I'm not there. So everyone I know in the UK is moaning about the heat. Apparently, it's going to be 40 degrees Celsius tomorrow, which is really hot. It's kind of like Death Valley, where the Undertaker comes from. Hot.
Right.
This is here. It's a perfectly pleasant temperature, so I'm content.
Yes, I remember being in Europe many years ago and staying in fairly cheap accommodations without air conditioning and sleeping while sweating, and it being in the Fahrenheit in the 90s or even 100 at 11 p.m. So yes, I can.
Yeah, we don't have air
sympathize.
conditioning. We don't have air conditioning
Mm-hmm.
in Europe. It's not a thing.
Yes. Well, I mean, we're just lower. We're closer to the equator in the United States than you are. I think isn't Washington D.C. in the same latitude as Rome?
Yeah, but then you don't have the North Sea, whatever it's called, the thing.
Yeah, stream.
The Gulf Stream, which keeps it cool. It keeps it warm, up our
warm.
way.
Yeah.
Yes. But yes. So I'm content with that situation. It's not too bad here. And also, as you know, I mean, the Prime Minister thing that I was concerned about last week has got worse, and it's looking like it's going to be a choice between a very wealthy Asian man and a woman who seems to be some sort of airhead.
Penny?
Yeah, Penny.
How could a woman named Penny be an airhead?
Well, she's Penny for a start, but I mean, she's don't know what she's talking about. Her former boss said she couldn't organise a tea party in Holland Park. Holland Park being a place renowned for its tea parties, so I'm still very concerned about that. But we'll find out what happens on Monday.
Do you think they're going to go with Penny?
It's hard to say because
she's kind of the safer choice.
She's more sexually attractive.
Boris is toxic.
No, that's the point. When you're dealing with a woman leader, it's that she's more sexually attractive than her main rival, Liz Truss. So she's a sort of a big built but pretty sort of woman, sort of thick as the African, but she's thick, like pretty tough. We discussed this last week. So she's thick, but she got a good boat race. So I think that they may well go with her, but then this black woman that's standing has got a lot of traction over the weekend because of her anti-trans views. So who knows what could happen? We'll find out.
Interesting. Yeah, just saying being anti-trans now is a way of just kind of like there's a certain kind of bravery signaling.
Yeah.
Not just a certain kind of a very strong amount of bravery signaling where it's like you're brave enough to say that XY equals woman and things like that. It's kind of or excuse me. XX equals woman.
XX is woman. Yeah, you yourself have been pulled into this cult of XY equaling woman. I think that's how far gone it is that we don't know anymore.
We don't. Yeah. We can talk. Well, I guess we will talk about transsexuality a little bit. So, this is on Substack, as all my videos are. But if you are watching this, you're either a subscriber or you are someone who's part of the world at large, because this will be open and free for everyone. And one of the reasons I want to make it free is that I do want to kind of spruik the book But don't worry, this isn't just a mere infomercial or something. I want to have a serious discussion because the book is very interesting. I'm very proud to have worked on it. And the best cover I think I've ever done, the most outlandish. The QAnon shaman made the cover along with our dear friend. What do you think her name is? Feminist name?
I've absolutely no idea. I imagine being a feminist, she's probably quite posh, so it's probably something like Millicent or
Madison, maybe.
Elizabeth or something like that. So
Or
yeah,
maybe she had hippie parents and her name is like
Saffron.
Rain Spirit.
Yeah, Tiger Sky.
Hot. Hopefully I'll run into her on Bumble. So let's talk about this book. It has a lot of it is kind of episodic in the sense that you talk about QAnon. There's a discussion of the SJW. There's a discussion of homosexuality and transsexuality, and some other things in there. There's a discussion of the incel movement and so on. So it is episodic in that way, and it's kind of talking about these salient phenomena in our times, but it does derive from a fundamental thesis of the Spiteful Mutants. So we're all kind of aware of the fact that the world has gone crazy. And I think that, and I think even if you're endorsing transsexuality or the SJWs or whatever, or you're still, it would be hard to gainsay that the world hasn't gone mad to some degree, in the sense that they're just this explosion of abilities to personally express yourself and new identities and new ways of thinking about yourself. I think it would be hard to deny that vis-a-vis 30 years ago. But I guess the question is why, and the question is, what is the real cause of that?
You could have a new way of thinking about yourself, which is adaptive, such as thinking that your life has eternal meaning and you should act accordingly. And you can have a new way of thinking about yourself that is not adaptive. And that is the fundamental difference, that what we've had until now in history is people being selected very strongly to be genetically adapted to the environment so they can survive in terms of their mental health, in terms of their physical health, and in terms of various specific mental traits, such as intelligence, such as being religious, such as being ethnocentric and whatever. And then that has created an environment which takes, because there's always going to be deviation from the healthy optimum, which takes even those who are not optimally genetically healthy or whatever in these various ways and pushes them along an adaptive roadmap of life, thus optimizing the extent to which they will be useful, productive, and fertile members of the group. And in traditional medical thinking, something is maladaptive, something is a disorder if it precludes you from having children. And all right, okay, there perhaps can be certain nuances and variations to that, but that's basically it. Now, what we had, therefore, was a group that was pushing you towards, to say, being mentally healthy, being physically healthy, being religious, being intelligent, and being group oriented rather than individually oriented, or rather optimally group oriented, an optimum balance that permitted the survival of the group in war and so on. And what happened was that with the collapse of these harsh Darwinian selection conditions, because of the Industrial Revolution, child mortality falls from about 50% in 1800, meaning that every generation, all of these interrelated, because anything that is adaptive is related to anything else which is adaptive at the genetic level. We know this now. Intelligence is genetically, low intelligence is genetically associated with heart disease, strokes, cancer, whatever. So these things are all interrelated, and the selection pressure against the maladaptive stuff collapsed from 50% child mortality to 1% child mortality. So you get a build-up of mutation, and that is in the direction of deviance from what we were selected for. So although some mutation will therefore make you hyper-religious perhaps and hyper-group oriented, in general it's going to be in the other direction. It's going to be that you're highly individualistic, you're concerned about the good of the individual over the good of the self, and this is going over the good of the group, and this is going to go together with being mentally unstable, with whatever. So therefore what you get is a build-up of these mutations within the population and of people that carry these mutations, but they are still being pushed along the adaptive roadmap of life. So there's a degree to which it's being suppressed. And you'll get some people that are so mentally screwed up, people like Oscar Wilde or I don't know, Audrey Beardsley or whatever, who in that context are still advocating maladaptive things and who will be shunned. But eventually we reach a tipping point where about a certain percentage of the population or a certain percentage of the elite are maladaptive. It's suggested that about 20% is that tipping point. There's a lot of experiments on this that show that you will start to advocate something that's objectively wrong once about 20% of people, particularly people that are considered powerful and up and coming, start advocating it. And when that happens, we then tip over into being an individually oriented society. And you then get runaway individualism as people realize that you can get status by being more individualistic, more concerned about feelings and harm avoidance and whatever than the last man. And so off we go. And this is what has happened. And you get then certain people who are in the elite, in positions of power, who are particularly spiteful, who who spearhead particularly maladaptive ways of seeing things that basically suppress fertility, that say to women you shouldn't have children, that say to women, often it is women, they're the most influenced by these things, that you shouldn't you should go on birth strike for the good of the environment, that are spiteful mutants that pull society in a maladaptive direction in the same way that the priests used to spearhead society in an adaptive group oriented direction. And so those people are can be seen as the leading spiteful mutants, and then basically you get a situation where anybody that can be inculcated with this stuff, with this maladaptive stuff, will be rendered infertile and will not pass on their genes. And all that is left is two kinds: is the people that can't be inculcated with this stuff, which is basically stupid people because they are too impulsive to be able to control their sexual desires, and people who are combined high intelligence with a genetic propensity towards wanting children, normally mediated by conservatism or religiosity or a combination of these, both of which are highly heritable, and so they are resistant to it. So I argue in the book that this spiteful mutant build-up is the sort of new child mortality, really. It's the new crucible of evolution, and those that can resist it have life and are the future. So that's really it in a nutshell.
Okay. Let's back up a little bit. You explained the book in 5 minutes, and I want to just talk about some of these things so that our audience can actually understand it. And then I want to push back a little bit on that question of adaptability. So I think the key insight that of this way of thinking is that question of child mortality as the crucible of evolution. And for a being to evolve, some will have to die, and death is part of life, etc. And so in previous times when child mortality was roughly 50%, women would need to have a number of pregnancies just to have enough children to continue the species and help them out on the farm or perpetuate their line or so on. And so there was a natural tendency for the women more likely to do that would kind of signal their conformity with the group. They might signal their religiosity. They might signal their femininity. They might signal, other things like that. And it worked towards a more fertile species. And I obviously agree that if you're not having baby, if you're not expanding, you're dying on some level. If you're just treading water or slowly sinking, you are dying. And so that is a key aspect to adaptability. What you're suggesting is, now that we've entered this land of luxury post the Industrial Revolution and the exploitation of fossil fuels and all of that, where child mortality is less than 1%, people can't even imagine the thought of their new baby dying. It's that was a real thing that was inured into people's consciousness and the culture, that babies will die. Now that is an unthinkable tragedy, understandably. And so there's that question of what actually is going to be the selection mechanism, what is going to choose people. And you are suggesting that it is getting sucked in to these increasingly bizarre woke concepts where, again, if you get sucked into transsexuality, whatever you want to say about the notion of, like, I have the soul of a woman but the body of a man, or vice versa, and that this is my genuine self-expression and I'm happier this way, or something like that, whatever you want to say about that, at the end of the day, that transsexual is, in the case of a male to female transsexual, is castrating himself or herself, and vice versa. A woman who transfers herself to a man is ending her genetic line. And it just is what it is. Those people are being selected out on a Darwinian condition, whether they like it or not. And whatever you might feel about the authenticity of their identity, I think in most cases, I don't think they're lying. I think they genuinely feel this way. I have sympathy for them, but the facts, that's what is happening.
Them the
But
breaks.
them the breaks.
They feel this way as a consequence of certain genetics that has gone wrong, of certain things that have gone wrong in utero, and of certain things that have gone wrong environmentally, in the case of a small percentage of them. But increasingly, I mean, the data from a study by Eric Kaufman indicated that the percentage of the population that identifies as gay or LGBT has increased from 2% to something like 15% over the last decade. Among humanities majors at American universities, it's 25% of them that identify as LGBT.
I
And
saw 20% for Gen Z as well, which was pretty
for Gen Z,
remarkable.
20%. So it's and in some of these universities it's 30%. So it's in America.
But the irony is that they're not actually having sex. So I mean, there's another component to this, which is that Gen Z and millennials are having a whole heck of a lot less sex than Gen X, Boomers, and Silent Gen at their age.
That's
And
but that's a lot of Silent Gen and whatever were married though at their age. But
well, whatever.
Comparing it,
I mean, it doesn't matter.
If you compare it to millennials or Generation Z, then yes, yes, that's certainly true.
Generation X, if you compare that, so they're having less sex, but they've almost this interesting aspect of the sexual revolution is that it's almost traded actual sex for identity or gender. So people are obsessed with these things, yet they're not acting on them. I mean, one of the aspects of this is that, like, actual homosexual sex of some kind is actually not increasing, but identifying with these things is increasing.
Yeah, and
which
that's
is
what
remarkable.
Kaufman noted. I expanded on for your viewers. I've got a short booklet coming out soon on homosexuality and transsexuality, which basically takes most of the section in Spiteful Mutants on this subject and that expands on it a little bit. Yeah. And one of the expansions was this research by Eric Kaufman and his colleagues, which found that since 2010, there has been an increasing disconnect between the percent of people that are saying, I've had homosexual sex, and the percent of people who are saying, I am homosexual. And this is particularly pronounced more so among women, and especially more so among left-wing women. In fact, being left-wing was the main mediating factor. So basically, it's a way of competing for status within left-wing groups
Right.
is to say falsely that you are transgender or into whatever, you know, that you are abnormal some way in terms of your sexuality. So that's all that's really happening.
Right.
It's a bit like people who are very, very rich saying, "Oh, I'm not rich, I'm comfortable." You know,
Right.
it's just a sort of a delusional thing. But with reference to what you were saying about this this change and this evolutionary process. The key issue, which I look at in Spiteful Mutants, that it can be articulated as, is really how environmentally sensitive you are, and in what direction you are environmentally sensitive, how sensitive you are to an evolutionary mismatch. And evolutionary mismatches are very important. If you put animals in an evolutionary mismatch, they will become very unhappy and they will go mad. And they will start doing maladaptive things like eating their own offspring and chewing their legs off and things. It sends them mad. And we humans are evolved to be in a situation of high mortality salience, to be surrounded by death. That is our evolutionary match. And when we are in that evolutionary match, then getting through every day is an achievement. And there is this sense of achievement and accomplishment. We don't have time to start thinking about things like what's the point of life or whatever. We don't rationalize everything down to money, because one of the things that hits in that kind of context is being religious and feeling that life has eternal significance, and therefore feeling that God exists and God is looking after us and all of this kind of stuff. And that is our evolutionary match. And then we are in a general society in general is in this religious environment, which takes things which are adaptive, which then become wrapped up in religiosity, such as that it is your duty to pass on your genes, you know, pass on your line from your parents and grandparents and whatever, and all of these kinds of traditional ideas. And so those ideas simply aren't questioned. Now, once you get into an evolutionary mismatch, if you're not particularly environmentally sensitive, and that correlates, by the way, with having low IQ, not being very environmentally plastic, well, then it doesn't matter. You won't feel this sense of dysphoria and meaninglessness, or if you do, it won't matter, because you'll be too instinctive and whatever, and too living in the now to really think about these things. If you are highly intelligent, however, then you are more environmentally plastic, and so you will be in an evolutionary mismatch. You will be sensitive to it, and you will therefore you will lose your belief in God. It won't hit in because you won't be stressed enough. And so therefore then you will have this sense of dysphoria. What's the point of life? Is there any meaning to life? And it's been shown that people become more fertile in this is in priming experiments, and they've been questioned in themselves, but hear me out. If you prime someone with evolution, with death, basically their desire to have children increases. And if you
this is borne out in history, you know, whatever those tests and however dubious they might be, it doesn't. I mean, there was a strange baby boom in Germany immediately after the war, and immediately after suffering, you know, fire bombings and, you know, death and destruction. There was a baby boom. I think it's, I mean, I think there's some deep aspect to humanity that might be difficult to quantify, that we recognize these things on a collective level and start breeding.
I'm sure, and we also after a
After
lot
a
of
disaster,
a lot of people go on about baby boomers after World War II, but they forget there was also a baby boom after World War One.
right?
So it makes two possibilities. One, on some level, we understand that a load of our people have been killed; they need to be replaced. But on another level, you know, we're actually living, and we have this mortality salience, and so we'd better have children. And there also tend to be kind of religious revivals in the wake of wars as well. And as I look at, in fact, it's Spiteful Mutants, one of the essays that on the one on
BLM, I guess,
BLM, yeah,
and QAnon to a degree, yeah.
QAnon, in the wake of World War One, religious revival; in the wake of World War II, huge religious revival. In the form of Billy Graham and so on, and then so almost like we were becoming more, as it were, decadent, more individualistic in the 30s, and then there was this backlash as things descended into disorder across the 30s, and you get these nationalism and these kinds of sort of neo-religious organizations. And then after the war, it's a serious, it's not as extreme in terms of war or whatever, but it's still very conservative. And then there's this movement in the 60s. But so it's those kinds of people, and they have this, and so it's the people that don't feel the dysphoria, or even if they do feel the dysphoria, the desire in them to have children is so strong that they just have children anyway, or that they just don't really feel the dysphoria because they have this sense of God is eternal and looks after me and wants me to have babies, or they have some other sense of, I don't know, the honor of the ancestors or whatever. They have these kinds of sense, and these are quantifiable and heritable. And it's people that have that have, if you like, the way of thinking that was prevalent among the pre-industrial population, that have that and have it genetically, basically, such that even though you can throw everything at them, you can throw at them a culture that is saying sterilize yourself, sterilize yourself, sterilize yourself, because that's what liberalism basically is. Liberalism is the great sterilizer. And as I look at in the book, if you look at the more intelligent, particularly among the top quartile of IQ, the massive sterilizer among them is liberalism, and the massive fertilizer is conservatism and religiosity. And so the result of that is that it's those people that survive. Lots of people, I suppose I wouldn't call them spiteful mutants, just people that aren't genetically strongly religious or conservative enough, are then inculcated with this insanity by the real sick people, the minority, who combine reasonably high intelligence such that they are listened to, such that they reach positions of power, with these various mutations, the Andrea Dworkin types. And they will, inculcate them with these maladaptive ideas, and they resign from the gene pool. And as you said, with these transsexuals, it's the most extreme, I think, with women, because women are evolved to be part of the patriarchy over a very long period of time. It was the women who were patriarchal and would signal their patriarchalness, and you're more likely to signal your patriarchalness if you are actually patriarchal. So the women who were patriarchal and submissive and whatever, those were the women whose genes were historically or prehistorically passed on, and there was a constant battle for them to pass on their own genes, because their parents would try and direct them towards a mate that was conducive to passing on their genes, not the genes of the daughter themselves. And so they would rebel against that by probably wanting to be majorly hypergamous or whatever, and then the parents would push back, and then some sort of optimum would be reached. If you take away parental control, then those people, basically almost all women, are in a serious evolutionary mismatch. If you take away parental control and let them just do what they like, and they can be expected to make very bad, very maladaptive decisions. And they're also evolved, of course, towards this patriarchal religiosity, which historically, that's been the religiosity. Take that away and give them a new religiosity, then their social anxiety and desire to conform will mean that they will advocate that. And if that's a maladaptive religiosity, then those women can become in more trouble than the men, because they're going to be
hold on here. Okay, I want to push. There are two things that I want to push back on in a way that I think it kind of opens up discussion. The first off is that women are making all of these maladaptive decisions. This kind of strikes me. It reminds me of the phrase, "It's not just the end of the world; it's the end of you." And I feel like I'm hearing some like. I know you're obviously not an incel. You have successfully reproduced, but I feel like the incel rage. I hear the incel rage of like, these women are being so dysgenic and crazy because they're not, being my housewife and taking their shoes off and getting in the kitchen and making me a sandwich.
Well,
like women are not. Women are not. Why does that not follow? Women are not making crazy decisions in terms of their mates. They're still.
If they're making decisions to sterilize themselves, then they are making.
I of course agree with that, but okay, I agree with that then. But in terms on another level, like the woman, I still think hypergamy is in effect here, and they're like a feminist woman. Now she might be almost too careful or too choosy to the point of like, what is it? Cutting off your nose to spite the face, in the sense of she's just waiting and waiting for the perfect man, the most sensitive, the one who's her soulmate, who fits in with her life, and she just waits and waits, and then she's 45 and it's too late. I'm sure that is obviously maladaptive, and I know that happens. I've met tons of people like that. But in terms of the choosiness, the not engaging in the kind of peer pressure monogamy of mid-century America, where you marry your high school sweetheart and you stick with him for 50 years. They are engaging in a kind of a very natural like selection. I mean, I watch a lot of documentaries, nature documentaries. I am a David Attenborough fanboy, among other things. And you see this over and over again of, it's mating time for these birds, or in the case of David Attenborough's latest masterpiece, dinosaurs, CGI dinosaurs. And they all go to some place and show off to the mate and get into fights. And 90% of them lose.
Yeah, that's been shown.
Monogamy is just not a natural thing.
Well, wait a minute. That's I don't think you can quite say that. I mean, what are the two dimensions that we have to look at here are the degree to which they are hypergamous, which makes sense in evolutionary terms, that the woman marries up because the man has higher status, because then he will have more resources to look after her and the offspring,
Right.
and also his high status evidence his good moral character. That's assuming that she's going for socioeconomic higher status rather than physical higher status. But that's the first thing. And the second thing is simply genetic similarity. And that's another thing that people select for. In the same way that men, we don't select hypergamously, but we select for physical attractiveness in women,
right.
But we as signs of fertility in youth, but we also select for genetic similarity. And the tendency with people who are K-strategic, as it were, that are nurturers rather than copulators, is that they will strike a balance between those two things, and they will, if anything, be more interested in genetic similarity. That's what's really important, genetic similarity. And then if you're genetically similar to somebody, you bond strongly with them, you'll bond strongly with the offspring, and you'll pass on proportionately more of your genes via that nurturing method. And I think that the comparison that you gave to 1950s America, I think the thing is that we're in a different population genetically to some extent, but B, we're in a different population culturally. So they were being inculcated with this system, which had come out of a long period of evolution where we were winning the battle of group selection, as it were, by being optimally ethnocentric. How were we being optimally ethnocentric? We were ensuring that males were cooperating internally and fighting externally. How were we doing that? We were ensuring that we were genetically relatively similar, and also we were ensuring that male jealousy was suppressed via monogamy, so that the men cooperate, so you get monogamy, and so it's adaptive in that sense. Now, once that system breaks down, once the selection pressure, therefore, basically for K strategists, breaks down, and you get this blooming of genetic difference from what we were selected for, you're going to get people that are more individualistic. And what those people are evolved to is a fast life history strategy ecology, i.e. an ecology where absolutely the women will marry hypergamously and have very little interest in genetic similarity, and the men will marry for youth and beauty and have very little interest in genetic similarity, and basically be strategic. And what that militates towards is the collapse of monogamy and the re-emergence of polygamy.
Yes, but monogamy leads to its own collapse, is what I'm saying. in the sense that, I mean, in monogamy is a kind of sexual democracy in a way. It is basically saying we are not going to have a big man who is polygamous and gets all the wives, and then we have all these middlemen or little men who get maybe one or probably none. In the case of little men, we're going to kind of democratize sex. And I don't disagree that is a workable framework, and that can lead to stability and lack of jealousy, and you can fight external enemies. I get that. But it also is it is a good thing for the little men. It is a good thing for people who aren't the best and who actually might very well have a higher level of genetic mutation or sickness or just so on. So
that's true.
Monogamy itself is creating its own demise in that sense. It's breeding for weaklings.
It's a good thing because it develops under these conditions of harsh Darwin, of very harsh selection pressure, where even the people that have more genetic mutation, as you say, are not going to be particularly mutated by the general standard of things because child mortality is so high. Secondly, the kind of societies in which that was in which that developed were societies of social descent, i.e., societies where every generation the bottom rung of the society died off. So the genetic weaklings just died off. So it was basically selecting for quality. Where in a very
but post-industrial revolution, it's not.
No, it's not. No. But
No.
it was doing the opposite of that. But it was doing that. And thirdly, you're in a context of these groups that are desperately competing for not enough resources. And in that context, you need to get the little male on board, and you can't have lots of internal fighting. If you compare it to the Yanomamo, which are of course highly polygamous, or indeed even the Bushmen, about 40% of the males breed. And about 60% of the males do not breed. And in that context, of course, there's abundant resources. You can fission away if there's a problem, and so polygamy is what you get, and you end up with these big man societies. You get weak marital bonds, very weak marital bonds, and just general sexual liberty. And the idea is that as a society becomes more complicated and more structured and whatever, first of all, it suppresses sex because it becomes more strategic and thus more interested in nurture than sex. But secondly, there's an idea that suppressing sex itself is good because you then focus your unfulfilled.
Yeah, I get that. What I'm saying is that monogamy creates its own demise, at least in the context of the 20th century, in the sense that it is going, when you have a one man, one woman rule for all of society, that and a notion of this general notion of social mobility upwards. So, your dad was a coal miner and you're going to be an architect or something like this. You are going to create a lot of morons. And the best people aren't going to be outbreeding the worst people,
don't disagree on that, sure, but
I agree. But so you have to locate monogamy itself as
monogamy is a phase. Monogamy is a phase in the cycle of a civilization,
right? And but feminism is also a phase of cleansing.
Yes, absolutely, and that's what I say in the book. I say that it could be argued that there is something evolutionarily adaptive, and some of our more incel viewers got very upset when I've said this before, but there is something adaptive about it, because what it is doing, what you've had is, since the Industrial Revolution, is this explosion of mutation,
right,
and of highly maladaptive individualistic women and highly maladaptive individualistic men, and that is, if it carries on like that, then because being individualistic is correlated with being genetically sick as well, with being mentally sick and with being physically sick, and if it carries on like that, then eventually you just get mutational meltdown, where everybody is so genetically sick that nobody is raised in a remotely adaptive manner, and the result is that what you saw in mouse utopia experiments, which is that just everybody just dies out. So there has to be some mechanism for humanity through its Malthusian humps and bumps to stay alive, and it seems to me that mechanism is that once you reach a certain level of civilization, you get dysphoria. And once you get dysphoria, the people who are more intelligent stop breeding, basically, and then the society collapses. That kills off all of the sick people, and then because Darwinian conditions are reintroduced, and then we just start all over again. And it could be argued that where we've got is so far, it's such a huge explosion in Malthusian terms. It's such an incredible warm period that we've created that it's almost outpacing the ability of the dysphoria. It has outpaced it, the ability of the dysphoria to precipitate a collapse. So what it's produced is something else, which is that society becomes so sufficiently genetically individualistic and sick that it tips over into being led by people like that, and then that cleanses the society of all of these maladaptive people over a period of time. And feminism is one method via which that happens, because it destroys monogamy, and once it destroys monogamy, you get de facto polygamy, and once that happens, all the incels are selected out on one side, and all of the women who are going to sterilize themselves for political reasons are selected out on the other side. And so it's a general cleansing back to a genetically healthy population.
Yeah. Let me let me also talk about this question of adaptability and also dysphoria. So the word dysphoria was one that I don't think anyone had heard, say, even 10 years ago. That was a fairly, strange phrase. Now everyone's heard it. It's on, it's on social media, it's on the news. And we understand that in the context of transgenderism, of you feel you're suffering from gender dysphoria, you feel like you have a different soul or mind or something in the wrong body. And that the way to solve this problem, if you want to call it a mental disorder or not, is to transition in some fashion to a new identity, which will involve a name change and so on. But there have been other transphoria, in the sense of anorexia is a kind of transphoria. Anorexia isn't merely, and you mentioned this in the book. I'm reiterating things, but just bear with me here for a little bit. It's not so much that you're making yourself thin or you're over dieting or something. It's that you feel that you are fat, even though you are shockingly unhealthy. It actually is a sense of not having a realistic conception of your body. You look in the mirror and you're obese. In fact, you're dangerously thin. So there have been other dysphoria. I think dysphoria is, a quality that you can see across the board. And this, I think, gets to the kind of evolutionary mismatch. Men feel like there's a lack of purpose. If you're unemployed and you're a regular Joe type, and someone tells you to learn to code or whatever, you just feel like you don't have any purpose. And there's a natural kind of backlash or rage that comes from that. Totally understandable, in fact. And I think so much of conservatism now is kind of like they are suffering from a kind of dysphoria or mismatch of the world's gone mad. I don't understand it. But don't you think, in terms of adaptability, I mean, you said that adaptability does imply a certain kind of intelligence, that you're able to go with the flow and conform. You're able to kind of sense where things are going and move with them.
Yes,
So
but this is the thing.
I know. Hold on. These people, there's a striking line in Mark Brauman's book where he says, if you said there are 100 different genders out there, if you said that 100 years ago, people would be like, what are you even talking about? That doesn't make sense. If you walk through New York City now, it is very clear that statement is accurate. There are 100 different genders. And you can kind of create a situation like this by speaking it in a way. Like you can, these people are in some ways adapting to a prophecy of sorts, which was the deconstruction of sex and gender and the patriarchy, et cetera. So these people who are engaging in this kind of behavior, they are adaptive. I mean, as we know, you saying that I am a right-wing white Christian or something, that's not going to help. That in certain circles that might make you kind of seem cool or a badass or something, but in terms of elite institutions, that is really harmful to you. And so these people are adaptive, and they're adapting to the environment maybe in a much better way than people who are resisting it.
Right. But
Now, the fertility is there. I get it. But do you like, I think this needs to be kind of pushed a little bit further.
I think it's just a sort of it's a philosophical sort of argument about the meaning of words. What you mean by adaptive, the word to adapt can mean to, compel yourself to get used to something or something like that. It can mean that.
Right.
And in that sense, you could argue, possibly, I'm not sure, but you could argue that they cause themselves to have an easier life. Although I'm not sure how much they do, because I think that what they are doing is an expression of their own mental torment. And I think that it probably makes, in a sense, makes them even more mentally tormented to do things like this. So I'm not sure.
But
And
don't
it
you
makes
have a
society.
prejudice?
I haven't finished.
Okay.
It makes society more crazy and crap and different from what we're evolved to want it to be like. But there is that argument, yes. But yes, certainly from an evolutionary perspective, which is the only perspective I'm interested in, and it is not adaptive to do these things. It is saying even if you do something like dye your hair blue, it is like being a wasp with yellow and black stripes. It's saying to people, stay away. It is expressing to them that, at least it is expressing to other people that might be interested in nurture and having babies, i.e. K strategists, as opposed to people that are interested in just sex. It's saying to those people, I'm a mental, I'm going to be a bad mother, stay away. That's what it's saying to them. And it's saying to them
Yeah,
quite successfully. It's probably
but
saying to other
that's
people,
just your
it's not just
right.
mine. No,
Many
no,
people find that don't just you need to recognize your own prejudices. I
no.
mean, it's no. I mean, you want certain people, you want an environment that is more Tory oriented or something.
No, I'm
But we
saying that
are entering a
people
world
are
in
people are attracted to those things. People are attracted to those things. Okay, just as certain people are attracted to very, very large breasts and very, very large buttocks, for example, on women. People are attracted to those things, but those people are strategists, and in a context in which we have, so
I
it's
get
people are
it.
saying that they are. We've got data on that, and so that means that they, in its context in which we have reasonable contraception, those people aren't going to have babies. And it's the having babies that is, in evolutionary terms, adaptive. So yes, those people are adaptive in a sense. They are. You could argue that anybody that's adapted to a certain niche in society and manages to get a job or something, you could argue they're more adaptive than a person that I don't know has less money and less resources. There's all we can pass this word adaptive, but from an evolutionary perspective, it has a single meaning, and that is that.
I get it. I get it. But we are like, unless you believe, and I think actually this is a maybe unlikely but plausible, or at the least realistic view, that the industrial world is just going to collapse. There's going to be a supply chain crash and hyperinflation. We're just going to go back to some environment where you need to be really religious and family oriented just to survive. I think that's unlikely, but that might happen. Actually, I can see the possibility of collapse all around us. The fact is, we could also be entering a world where men can very well have babies. And there are examples, plenty of gay men, including Pete Buttigieg, basically passing on their genes through surrogate women. The fact that they even talk about the notion of, trans men being pregnant, I guess that's how you would put it, of a female to male transition actually getting pregnant. The fact that it's even an issue expresses the fact that it is happening. We could be entering a world in which, much like child mortality is kind of like far in the rear view mirror, that the family situation that was highly successful for adaptability in that sense and just pure reproduction is also kind of increasingly in the rear view mirror, where the way people are reproducing is in these, kind of, from our perspective, kind of bizarre and kind of scientific and horrifying ways.
What percent of the population are reproducing in that way?
A very small percentage right now,
and there's
but
a whole
it's not
section,
nothing.
but there's
It's increasing.
it's not nothing. And I mean, by the same token, people thought in the 1960s that we'd be living on Mars by now, wearing silver spacesuits.
Okay, that's a fair point.
Hasn't worked out like that, and I think the reason it hasn't worked out like that is because civilizations follow predictable patterns. and ours has. And so there's a section on this in the book where I counter argue all of the various arguments that people have put to me about why it is that an evil conspiracy of paedophiles are going to force us to all become robots, or I'm straw manning them here, but it's that kind of futurism, Ray Kurzweil sort of argument, whereby I look in detail at the many problems that there are with this kind of genetic interference. The only thing, even though we have streamlined, we have got the human genome now, we don't even understand which genes affect intelligence. We only have indirect genes, which seem to be related to education and things like that. And we don't understand what the relationship is between the different genes. And so even if we do select, let's say for intelligence, then we, or for certain, select out certain poor health genes or whatever, then we're only going to get a small percentage of the population that do it. And as I think I look at in that book, that we'd have to sterilize 90, or at least stop from breeding anybody with an IQ of below 92, which is 1/3 of the population, every generation, just to break even. No, I don't look at it in that book. I look at it in the eugenics book, which I'm currently doing. But right. The problem with that is, can you see this happening? Can you see this being tolerated and whatever? And my answer is yes, I could, at a time when we were much more group oriented and so forth, when it was being advocated by Galton and people like that.
Well, it's just a question of values. I think
so. That's the thing. So you've got to have highly group-oriented values to be able to do something like that.
It's not just group-oriented. Like, for instance, if CRISPR develops in the way that it could, and we do enter a world where designer babies are maybe like for the super elite in the first 5 to 10 years, but it actually gets democratized, just like all technologies get democratized and they become less expensive. There will certainly be these white liberal types who, they live in a nice suburb in Northern Virginia. They send their children to their 2 kids to private school. Hold on. Let me finish. They send their kids to private school. They want to get into Yale. They want to get a law degree, or they want to work in corporate America or maybe the government, etc. They will, if they had the ability, they would select for intelligence. They would probably, let's be honest, select for blue eyes. They would maybe select for blonde hair. I think they would, knowing them, they would not. They would be kind of tastefully eugenic. They would probably select for, a nice body, but not something,
a medium size, an average size penis.
A nice handful of breast and not, yeah, you know what I mean. Now, if the underclass and the lower class ever got their hands on like line editing eugenic tools, would they select for they would select for athleticism, I bet. That would be the best thing. They would select for like some weird gene that gives you a 10-foot long penis or something. Like, they would do the most bizarre shit imaginable. I mean, if you look at,
we know what they select for. We know there's actually been research on it from working class people that have babies via sperm donors. They want extroversion. They want basically X Factor bullshitters. That's what they want. But I think that
isn't that horrifying? What the average American would, if he had the eugenic ability, what he would do to the human race is just terrifying.
Right, but the thing is that even in two things, even in arguing your point, unconsciously you betrayed the problem, which is exactly they want 2 kids. And there seems to be no financial incentive that seems to work to do anything about that. People, no matter if you offer them loads of money or whatever, they still, okay, you can give me some anecdotal examples of very rich people that have loads of children, like Donald Trump or something. But in general, they really do want a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Whereas these people at the other end of society, people like Mick Philpott, who set fire to his house in order to get to claim an insurance fraud, and then managed to kill 6 of his kids, 6 of his children in Derbyshire, right? He had
Darwin Award.
He had 17 children. He had 17 children. So yes, he burned to death 6 of his children, but he still had 11 others with various women to fall back on. And
Yes.
it is that level of extremeness. It is the only group within white people in Britain that is breeding above replacement fertility is the criminal underclass. And as for your comment about what people that are working class, underclass would do with this kind of knowledge, I've had some very interesting conversations actually with a guy who was born to a working class family via a very, very, very high IQ sperm donor called Matthew Archer, and he's got a YouTube channel and whatever, very interesting chap, and he turned out, genetics triumphed over environment in the end. Once he got away from his parents, but people don't understand how stupid the underclass are. They have nothing to do with them. They have no people like you. I think I have more of an understanding than you do, but I didn't go to private school or anything. But I think I am limited in my understanding of it. His parents, oh, you're going to go to Cambridge? Oh, isn't there a university there or something?
Yeah.
That's the level of knowledge.
Oh, that seems benign in comparison with like tattooing your face, or I mean, I don't know what to say. Yeah, they're.
I can't see them having the impulse control to even take up CRISPR editing, and they're going to have large amounts of children, and it's more than going to outweigh. So my personal hypothesis is we're going to be at an IQ of 85 by the end of the century. And that will be in a context in which the IQ of 85 is the highest IQ of any country, putting aside East Asia, and they're going down. So that they'll be probably 90, we'll be 85. And think what that'll do to countries like Mexico that now have an IQ of 85, because they won't have cleverer people that can sell them stuff.
Right.
So I'm thinking that this CRISPR is unlikely to occur. I think this is just. The other thing is that what. We have every single symptom of being in our civilizational winter, as I show in the book. If you look at Sir John Glove's book, the Fall of Empires, and even he was saying in the 70s we had every single symptom of being in the winter of civilization, and now we have them to an even more pronounced degree. This individualism that is so extreme, this new Gnosticism, which says that we're all individual lumps of consciousness in the darkness, all individual gods that define ourselves, and
right.
The other gods have to accept that we are gods, and if they don't, then they're evil devil gods. This is what we've kind of got back to. And this the other thing is that as I look at in Spiteful Mutants, is the change in the nature of religion. So religion is a bundle of things. Agency over detection, pattern over detection, blah, 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 that come together into this thing, religion, which is adaptive and then is selected for. And what you would expect as it weakens, it would come apart. And the nature of religion would change to more like what you have among hunter-gatherers, things like magic words that you can't say, and amulets and talismans and all this, and that we kind of do have that.
You see that on left. You see that on left and right. Yeah. No. Obviously, like it is curious. Like when you said that, the immediate thing that came to mind was the N word, the dreaded N word, which I won't say. First off, just because I'm a polite person, but secondly, because we would just be immediately banned, and it's not worth saying. But it is just a word at the end of the day. But it does have a kind of magical quality. But you can see this as well in the kind of shibboleths that you see in right-wing politics, the kind of fascination with Trump and certain talking points and so on. They also have kind of magic words. They do,
and I think that you get a certain kind of religiosity. And I look at this again in the book. I'm balanced about this. I do think that this QAnon or whatever, who is it that it is attracted to? Low IQ people, well, they're high mutational load, obviously, and basically people with schizoid tendencies, and that is an expression of
to defend Q. Not all of them are low IQ.
No, not all of them.
There were some remarkable people who were interviewed. There was some interesting interviews with the New York Times of a middle-aged, I think perhaps Jewish woman who was highly educated and very reasonable and sensible, who was a Q believer and an Obama voter previously.
I wouldn't be at all surprised if she had schizoid.
Totally.
And
but
then she's mutated, then, isn't she?
I get it. But sometimes these highly intelligent people can talk themselves into curious things.
Oh yeah,
I'll tell a little anecdote real quick.
I wouldn't disagree on that. Sorry, what's your anecdote?
Okay, so I was just walking around town, and I don't get this anymore. There was a time in 2017 where, less so in Montana, but certainly in Washington D.C. or Virginia, where I would walk someplace and someone would be like, "Oh, you're Richard Spencer. Fuck you. I'm glad you got punched." Da, da, da. And that was the most of it. And then sometimes you'd have some kind of weird character who I found it interesting. Many of them were not white, and they'd be like, "Oh, you're cool, man. I love your stuff." Whatever. It was crazy days. I don't get that very much anymore. But it happened the other day. So I was just, I had just gotten a haircut or something. And this woman who was, I would say, a fairly attractive woman, she's wearing like the Lululemon leotard kind of thing. And she came up to me. She's like, "Are you Richard Spencer?" And I was like, "Oh God, here I have my lecture on the public sidewalk." And but it was odd. She started mentioning all these things that didn't make sense, and then she handed me her manuscript, which is a little pink notebook that she wrote up. And I was joking about this. I think she has adopted Catholicism, like Catholicism. And so she had written this book of sorts that is this like synergy between Catholicism, Mary worship, and QAnon, with a little bit of Holocaust revisionism thrown in just to spice up the drink.
Are we publishing this?
Maybe. uh, it's just, it was, but this woman, she was attractive woman in her 30s or maybe early 40s or something. She's not like you meet cranks and they're kind of like old people and they're like, "Oh yeah," they talk weird. She's not like that. She talked normal. If I saw her, I would say this is a happy housewife who gives Tupperware parties. She's very normal, but she is like reading her text. I didn't do anything because there's no threats of violence. There's no, there's no sense that she wants to harm anyone, including myself, but anyone. So it's just, but she's whacked out of her mind. And like, it's insane. It's like you're reading it's like a benign version of like like the notebooks that you would read in like a movie like Seven or so. It's just incredible. And this is a seemingly normal person. Could you imagine 30 years ago that type of woman adopting those types of beliefs? It just seems incredible.
No, well, she'd be a slightly schizoid woman with slightly wacky religious beliefs 30 years ago. But now she has access to, we can find other people like us so easily. I think we talked about this before, that if you years ago perhaps, that if you lived in small town America in the 50s and you were highly intelligent, well, you'd be spending your time with lots of people that weren't as intelligent as you, and you'd be dragged down by them and they'd be pulled up by you and whatever. But now, as Charles Murray looks at, you can migrate to be with other highly intelligent people, and you get this brain drain within the US, and you get this cognitive stratification. Well, in the same way, what the internet allows is for a sort of mental stratification, whereby people that are mentally healthy are basically going to find each other, and people that are crazy are going to find each other. So in days of old, she wouldn't be able to find websites that would be telling her all this stuff, and then she'd be thinking about it. And now she can, and she can watch videos about it, and on it goes, and on it goes. And
I would say that she was very critical of me. She was like, "I used to like you, but you've changed." So I think that's maybe
you've said some very liberal things of late. It's been
I know.
And people have a go at me and say, "Well, why? You've got to talk to him about this stuff he's saying about this." It is.
In some ways, I've changed. In some ways, I'm not, and in some ways, we all wear a mask, don't we? But I was very happy that this perfectly nice woman, who is not a danger to society in my estimation, but who is whacked out of her fucking mind, disagrees with me. That was actually kind of reassuring. I was like, I think I'm sane.
Yeah, I was reassured. It's always reassuring to find out that people that dislike you are crazy. They, in my experience, they generally are.
Deeply disappointed her.
But she would. I mean, the fact that she was good looking or whatever. I mean, these correlations are only small, of course, but on a general group level, they'd probably be less attractive. But you're right. I think that you wouldn't have had as it would have been more unlikely 30 years ago, because you were forced to conform to a general. There was a general society in a way 30 years ago, and now there's just a series of warring microcosms.
And there's no mainstream media anymore in the way that there was 30 years ago. I mean, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, and I lived in a middle class family with a father who was a professional. He was a doctor, so that was my background. But we got the Dallas Morning News every day. And I think my father was subscribed to the Wall Street Journal, and then we got the New York Times on Sunday. And then I would watch the nightly news. I remember liking the McLaughlin group. That's kind of why I was, I have little homages to the McLaughlin group here and there in our theme song, for instance. But there was something on high that was able to tell me what was up and down and right and left and real and unreal and fake and real. And that kind of technological propaganda structure is now gone. So this woman, I seriously doubt she's read the local paper. She certainly hasn't read the New York Times. Say what you will about the New York Times. They've gone after me. I mean, I should be biased against them on some level, but I'm not. But, she doesn't have any of that. She has a Facebook group, and where they found each other, and they're generating more of themselves and kind of whacking each other out of their own minds. Yes, and it's just a radically different environment.
That's society. That's modern society. That's just a microcosm of modern society, which is that modern society used to be adaptive and so forth, and was forcing everybody else to be adaptive, and now it's maladaptive and it forces everybody else to be maladaptive, and then that happens at the level almost at the local level, in the sense that there is no such thing as local anymore. There is local plus the internet, which means that local can be anywhere in the world, and local becomes ideological, becomes people that you concur with, and then you end up then within groups. And this was interesting. This is a paper I had published recently on the Mormons. Within groups, if once you're within conservatism, then intelligence predicts breeding within conservatism, because once you're within a subgroup, then if that subgroup prizes fertility, then you, as an intelligent person, you signal your conformity to the subgroup in order, and one of the ways you do is through having children. And so you end up then with this, and with certain subgroups you then just get like insanity, like conspiracy signaling, basically, to the point where I'm much more of a conspiracy theorist than you. I think the earth is flat. Or whatever, and things that would be unthinkable 30 years ago for someone to go around saying the earth is flat, and for them to interview people on the telly saying that the earth is flat. It just wouldn't have happened. But I believe it did happen in the 70s briefly, and that was a period of disorder.
That was a period of absolute disorder.
I've actually on telly saying that there was a flat Earth Society by Waterloo Station. I used to be going past it whenever I went to London. So some people have suggested that we will sort of go through this. And it's not the actual harbinger of the end, that it's just sort of a slow movement towards the end, and there'll be a backlash, there'll be a conservative backlash, and it'll carry on.
But the conservative backlash that we're seeing is in itself insane.
Yeah, that's the difference. It's not a conservative backlash like Thatcher to Labour in the 70s in England, or Reagan to Carter. It's a conservative backlash which is highly well, to be fair, Reagan was fundamentalist Christian and whatever, wasn't he? But
he pandered to them, but he brought the religious right into the GOP. He was not like that personally. He actually promoted gun control and abortion as governor of California, for what that's worth. And the gun control was actually to a degree to suppress the Black Panthers. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. He brought those people in. I mean, I think the backlash that's coming is going to be far more insane. I would often, in my adult life or career, I would often tell the joke that conservatives are liberals 30 years ago. So, at one point conservatives would say, we don't like homosexuality. And then 5 to 10 years later, they would say, well, we kind of sort of like homosexuality, but just keep it to yourself. And then they would say, well, we love homosexuality, but we don't like homosexual marriage because that's a threat. And then another 5 to 10 years, well, homosexual marriage is a conservative value, but we don't like transsexuals. And the process just goes on. There's this kind of ratcheting effect, and conservatives are just following behind. I think that's largely true, but I'm wondering if that is going to be true now. I sense a conservative backlash that is real, that is whacked, and that is actually lasting and wants to win, for better or for worse.
Well, that's what also happened to a more limited degree in the 80s, though. I mean, the conservatives became more anti-gay. The 80s was more anti-gay than the 70s.
Right. But this will be on a new level. Like, I don't Roe v. Wade, overturning Roe v. Wade was a decades long process, and they've done it, and they're already moving towards like preventing women from interstate travel and so on. And if you just look at the internet, with like, if you think of Nick Fuentes not exactly as a thought leader, but as a kind of barometer, which I think is the proper way to see him. He's just openly and seemingly unironically, I mean, even if you're using irony, that's just a mask, but just talking about, we need to go back to the Middle Ages, but a kind of 1950s version of the Middle Ages from what it sounds like. And yeah, all of that might just be kind of signaling or nonsense, or
be many test tube babies
whatever.
in the Middle Ages.
No, but it's this, I sense a very strong backlash coming. I think people like myself, like, what attracted me to Trump in 2016 was, first off, the kind of chaos of he's opening up space, and my views, which are radical, could get into the mainstream, and they did to a large extent. But Trump in 2016, despite his crazy personality and vulgarity, you could make a very good case that Trump of 2016 was a kind of nationalist populist figure, similar to Ross Perot, similar to Pat Buchanan, at least the secular side of Pat Buchanan, where it's about, let's have a normal country, let's rethink our foreign policy, let's build things here, let's build infrastructure, let's keep, bring back industrialization. Maybe that won't work, maybe it can't work, but there's at least a kind of reasonable secular nationalism. And you see this in America. You see this among the Democrats actually a lot. And Trump tapped into that. And I think that was attractive, along with, this is a crazy time and a moment to kind of jump in. But at this point, what is Trumpism if it isn't like calling out the Democrats as satanic pedophiles? Like, you don't hear talk about the wall or certainly immigration reform anymore. You hear more talk about blood drinking and flat earthism and other bizarre shit. And I don't think I'm misrepresenting them. I don't think I'm being unfair and like a liberal snob saying this. And so the backlash is going to be over. It is going to be like Handmaid's Tale stuff. It is going to be QAnon wild conspiracy stuff. It's going to be, that's what we're going to see. And that kind of like plausible and reasonable secular nationalism is just out the window.
But you can't, that's the thing, if you can't do that with these people. If you're reasonable with them, they'll walk all over you. So you have
to be but don't just blame the left for this. I mean, it's coming. I mean, I agree you can blame the left to some extent, but don't just blame them. I mean, this is coming from the right. This is coming from these people. QAnon wasn't just some passing fad. It appealed to millions of people. It appealed to millions more people than the alt-right did.
Yeah, it's true. It is an expression of what's happening in genetic terms, in terms of on the right as well as the left, and it's it's there. But you could mention The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale is so ridiculously unrealistic in terms of evolution.
I agree.
It's so stupid. I think I want to do a video debunking The Handmaid's Tale. It's so absurd. Think how much those women would be worth. They would be worth their weight in gold if they were the fertile ones. They would be worshipped as goddesses. And the idea
I
it'd be like the
basically
queens
agree
of a
with you.
hive.
Yeah.
The idea
A
that
magic,
they could be
yeah.
enslaved is just totally stupid.
Also, The Handmaid's Tale, just in its like sci-fi or political elements, it almost, it's like as dumb as the Turner Diaries. You know, they'll have these chapters. I listened to The Handmaid's Tale. They had these chapters where it's like, I was working at my job and then we all got fired. And then there were people with guns outside who told us to get, you know, it's almost like
There's
we
one
can
bit where
take over the
they poke
government.
this
Just, you
girl's
know,
eye out for disobedience or something and render her ugly. Okay, I'm like,
Yeah.
she's one of the few fertile women in the world, and you're going to make it more difficult for a man to be sexually
Right.
aroused by her. That doesn't make
Right.
any sense.
I agree. I agree. It's a total,
that.
massively
Stupid,
overrated
rubbish
book.
rubbish, awful, and they should ban it.
Yeah. Ironically.